Because the investigation has taken so long, and because the Ramseys publicly don't appear to be cooperating with police, even some of their closest friends and staunchest supporters are starting to wonder.
But let me assure you that I did not kill JonBenet. I did not have anything to do with it. I love that child with my whole of my heart and soul.
Almost 3 decades on, and the JonBenet Ramsey case still haunts the public consciousness. And I mean, why wouldn't it? A beautiful 6-year-old girl, a mystery that remains unsolved. She disappeared, as we know, on Boxing Day nearly 30 years ago, in the middle of the night, in the safety, or what should have been the safety and sanctity of her own home, her own bedroom. It is a story that is as tragic today as it was when it first emerged, and it captivated not just America, but it captivated the whole world, and I think to some extent it still does. People are still asking what happened. Look, no one knows. I don't know, I don't profess to know, but I am going to weigh in as to what I think might be the most likely theory.
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 5515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please.
I'm Jo. I'm a forensic trained clinical psychologist, and in today's video I want to weigh in on some of the suspicious and some of the strange, odd things about this case. And gee, there are so many. I'm going to do this in 3 parts. Part 1 is going to look at some of the theories, and I'm going to let you know what I believe is the most likely thing that could have happened. In part 2, I'm going to have a look at Burke Ramsey specifically. And if you watch this video, you'll know why I'm going to do a whole part on Burke Ramsey. And I'll let you know what I think about his involvement or non-involvement in the case. And the third part is I'm going to look at the cultural phenomenon of child beauty pageants and what I think about that, and whether or not JonBenet's participation in these pageants could have made her a target and ultimately been a contributing factor to her death. So let's get into it and start with some of the basics. Now, as most of you already know, on December the 26th, 1996, JonBenet Ramsey was found dead in the basement of her family's Boulder, Colorado home. She had been strangled, she'd been and potentially assaulted. The discovery of her body came hours after her parents, specifically Patsy Ramsey, called 911, claiming to have found a ransom note at the bottom of her stairs. The ransom note is very interesting. It demanded $118,000 specifically, and all the while, JonBenet's body is lying in the basement, right under their noses. I mean, this case is absolutely riddled with suspicious and unusual details. Netflix have recently released a series on this case. I've sat and I've watched over 6 consecutive hours of police interview tapes and ample other things that I've watched to form my opinion on this. I'm going to start with the ransom note. I'm going to go through a few different elements of this case and give you my opinion. I'm going to stop and look at some videos and talk to you through this. But the ransom note has to be the number one odd thing about this case. So one of the first things we need to notice about the ransom note is that it was written in the house. It was not brought into the house. Whoever did this found paper, found a pen, and took the time and the risk of writing a 3-page ransom note. Now, keep in mind, they wouldn't know, presumably wouldn't know where the paper was, where the pen was, much less where JonBenet Ramsey was. The house was a labyrinth that looked like a rabbit warren. When you look at the floor plan, it's a very confusing house to navigate. Also, it would have been dark, so this person is somehow navigating and finding all of this spontaneously, serendipitously. So that's the first peculiar thing. Would someone really risk doing that? We also see that the note was addressed to Mr. Ramsey, but a practice note was written, and it was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey in the first instance. Whoever wrote the note didn't continue with that, started a new page and addressed this new letter to Mr. Ramsey. So that is also an interesting piece. Why would they do that? And as we go through the letter a bit more, we see that they started off referring to themselves as a small foreign faction, so a collective, a group. Later on in the letter, they go back to the singular and refer to themselves, the author, as I, which is incongruent and unusual. I mean, have they forgotten what they started writing? But referring to themselves as a small foreign faction in itself doesn't seem right to me. No faction refers to themselves as a faction, much less a small one. It just doesn't seem correct. It's more like someone's watched an episode of CSI and is using some of the hot words, and putting it into a letter. So this 2.5-page ransom note has to be the most perplexing element of this entire case. Its unusual length, written on the Ramsey's notepad, the amount that's asked for, the terminology in it. I mean, it reads more like a movie script. Especially the $118,000 ransom amount. I mean, who asked for $118,000, especially when that almost matches John Ramsey's Christmas bonus?
Well, that was one of the theories that I came up with, that it was close to the net amount I'd received that year as a bonus. 118 means something to the killer. We know that. We believe that. Whether it's tied to my bonus or something only the killer knows, we don't know.
Did you know that your husband got this kind of a bonus? Not at the time, no.
It's just too small amount. I've never heard of a ransom case asking for such a peculiar or small amount of money. Usually it's rounded up to $250,000 or $1 million or $10 million, but not $118,000. It's just odd. Forensic linguists have looked at this, they've analysed the handwriting and debated the authorship for years. And there's no answer to this. There are some strange matches when you look at it between Patsy's handwriting and the note. There's also Gary, who was one of the suspects. His handwriting comparison to me is more affirming than the one with Patsy. But either way, there's just too many anomalies to be certain. And you have to be certain in a case like this. In criminal court, it's not just suspicion, you have to have evidence. And there's just not enough affirming evidence with the handwriting analysis. But what about DNA? Whoever wrote that would have left DNA all over that pad, all over the pen. Yet there's no confirming DNA evidence either. Weird. So what I can conclude from this note, that if Patsy did write it, and it is a big if she is responsible, I do not believe it would have been intentional. I believe that would have been an accidental death and she would have been covering it up. So if that were the case, she would have written this note in the most impulsive, emotional, grief-stricken moment. And the detail that goes into it just doesn't seem to make sense. It just doesn't fit. So it's really hard to weigh up the things that are suspicious here and the things that are perhaps redeeming here and put it together and come up with an answer. And I think I'm struggling, like everyone else who has analysed this case, and in particular the ransom note, to have a conclusive opinion. But I think the weight against Patsy writing this perhaps is stronger than the weight that she did. But I also can't completely rule out the possibility she had something to do with it. So let's go, my opinion, about 50% likelihood that Patsy wrote it or had something to do with the writing of this ransom note. Okay, the next bit of evidence we'll look at is the 911 call, where some people think they've uncovered some unusual content. Let's have a listen.
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 5515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was this? I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's gone. Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says FBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. I'm sending an officer over, okay? Please. Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out and she right here. Oh my God, please. Okay, well, there's somebody. I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath. Please, okay? Hurry. Patsy. Patsy?
So a couple of things about the 911 call that are interesting, particularly in that end bit where the audio has been enhanced and a child's voice is saying, "What did you find?" Burke later testified in court that he identified that voice as his own. Now, the reason this is interesting is because Patsy says she found the note and called 911 immediately, and she later testified that Burke was asleep. But if Burke is in the back of that phone call, he can't be asleep. The two can't be true. So there's a little bit of a question mark around the veracity of those statements. The second thing some people have noticed is that Patsy says, "I'm the mother," using the definite article the, which is quite a distancing word, as opposed to "I'm her mother," which is more emotive. I'm not sure what to read into that. Really don't read much into that at all, but it is something to notice. And finally, the 911 operator, I believe, came out later and in hindsight, which is easy to do, said she suspected Patsy from the very beginning, that she found the call suspicious. But whether or not we can read anything into that either, I'm not so sure. So based on the 911 call, just on its own, there's nothing really definitive or persuasive either way. A couple of unusual things, but nothing that would make me think immediately that there's anything overtly suspicious. And the third thing we're going to look at is the handling of the crime scene, which was a mess. It was chaotic. Friends and family were trampling through the house. There was contamination of evidence from one end to the other. The body was moved before a thorough forensic analysis could even be completed. Now, I understand the Boulder police weren't accustomed to big murder cases, but come on, you only have to watch a couple of episodes of Law and Order to know the first thing you do in a crime scene, and there was no doubt this was a crime scene, is preserve all evidence and cordon off the perimeter. Pretty clear the Boulder police have messed up in a monumental way. Now, all the evidence, when it's contaminated from the outset, taints a case. It makes it very hard to look at it objectively and to be able to really have any degree of certainty around what has happened. The fourth thing that has come under a lot of scrutiny by everybody is the behaviour of John and Patsy Ramsey, particularly in the moments after the initial crime.
I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it. So we all got to start working together from here this day forward to try to find out who the hell did it.
A lot of people have called out their behaviour as being unusual, not cooperating with the police, and just suspicious in general. But grief manifests very differently for everybody. And the hate and the threats from the public and the suspicion and the behaviour of the police. I mean, the police had pretty much determined their guilt at the outset. So is it really unusual that she didn't want to talk to them? Is it really unusual that a lawyer would, in that case, give advice, or in any case really, give advice not to say anything? If I was being attacked and accused of a crime, much less a crime against my own child, that I knew I did not commit, would I come forth freely and talk to police and potentially incriminate myself, knowing they were hell-bent on getting me? Probably not. You know, this makes me think of a famous case in Australia, the Lindy Chamberlain case. There was a movie made out of this. There's a famous line from that movie, which I'm not going to say, but Lindy Chamberlain was accused. She was under a lot of suspicion, and many people thought she was guilty because when she was in the courtroom, she didn't show emotion, and people thought she should be upset, she should cry. So based on her behaviour, people assumed she was guilty. Is the same the true here with Patsy Ramsey? Did she not behave the way we expect her to behave? But the thing is, who knows how you're going to behave in a situation like that? And an important part to mention, it's not a nice part, but I do think it's critical to my analysis, is that if this was an accidental death and John and or Patsy were trying to cover it up, it's just preposterous to think they would use assault as part of that cover-up. It doesn't fit the MO, it doesn't fit the profile, and for me, that in itself suggests a very unlikely situation that Patsy was involved. And the last thing I'm looking at is the DNA evidence, or the lack of the DNA evidence. I mean, initially, foreign DNA was found on JonBenét's clothing, and this had originally pointed to an intruder theory because the DNA didn't match anyone in the house, including Burke, the younger brother. But advancements in forensic technology have now complicated this narrative. The DNA doesn't match any known suspects, but the thing is, I've mentioned the contamination of the crime scene. So because of this contamination, it leaves a big question mark over all the DNA evidence, none so much as the ransom note itself. If we go with what Patsy has said, that she came down the spiral staircase, found the note, picked it up and immediately called 911, well, there would still be DNA evidence on this note. Whether she wrote the note or had any involvement is irrelevant. There would be DNA evidence on this note, but there isn't. Now, why is that? I can't get past that part. The DNA, or the lack of the DNA evidence, is the biggest problem in this case, because that is what ultimately would tell us who the murderer was, and yet it's missing. In late 2022, the Boulder Police announced that they were revisiting DNA using advanced technology, but nothing really came of this. There was another 2023 Colorado cold case review team that also explored this, but still no arrests, no advancements, and it leaves us still speculating. How could this have gone so wrong? How can what seems like an otherwise clumsy and unusual crime not have any advancements or answers yet? There are some unusual things about Burke, and I'm going to dedicate part 2 of this video series to that completely, but Burke and John, the father, were both ruled out through DNA evidence. So I'm pretty confident also, based on the interviews that I've watched John conduct, that he is not guilty. I feel reasonably confident in that. Patty idolised JonBenet. Her room was just a little girl's dream. She had her own Christmas tree in her bedroom. These were parents that doted over their child, and Patsy almost lived a vicarious life through JonBenet's participation in beauty pageants. So would these loving parents kill their own child and set up such an unusual stage to try and throw everyone? Is it possible? Well, yes, it's possible. Anything is possible, but is it likely? There's just not enough evidence for me to think it's more likely than not. There are still things that remain unexplained and have massive question marks over them. But is it more likely than not? I can't say that it is. In part 2, I am going to look at Burke a little bit closer. Burke was 9 years old at the time of the murder. He was interviewed then, obviously, by police, again at age 11, and he famously appeared in an interview with Dr. Phil. And these interviews are very curious and leave a lot of question marks, a lot of questions unanswered about whether Burke had any involvement in this case. So join me in part 2, where I will complete a full behavioural and psychological case analysis of Burke and answer questions like whether or not I think he was somehow involved in his sister's death. I hope you've enjoyed today. It's a bit of a long video, but I spent hours preparing this video, and there was so much other evidence and so many other peculiarities that I could have talked about. I think they are saturated in the internet. I'm sure you can find anything you're looking for, but my own personal opinion, based on the evidence, the very tainted, corrupted evidence, is that as reality would have it, there's just not enough to incriminate Patsy, but there are still many, many questions there that remain unanswered. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Have a happy, peaceful day. Bye for now.